На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. For the first time in ages, it seems like we may actually have a title race in our hands in the RPL, as leader Zenit lost to Rubin at the weekend, while Spartak demolished Krasnodar, and CSKA eased to a routine 2-0 victory over AKhmat, with new signing Salomon Rondon netting for the first time. Since the winter break, Zenit have picked up just 1 point from usually winnable games against Rostov and Rubin. To discuss the title race and the rest of the weekend's fixtures in both the RPL and the FNL, I'm joined again by David.
Evening, James.
And Richard.
Good evening, James. Good evening, David. How are we all?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. It was a good weekend for my team. It was a good weekend for David's team. And it was a good weekend for your team as well, Richard. So we are going to start off with David's team. Rubin kept up their fine form with a 2-1 victory over Zenit at the AK Bars Arena. Despot opened the scoring with a penalty as he hit double figures of goals in the RPL this season. After that, Zenit were largely camped in the Rubin half with some stout defending, and in particular excellent goalkeeping from one Yuri Jupin, keeping them at bay. That was until Sardar Azmoun headed home a Yaroslav Rakitsky cross. In injury time, however, Denis Makarov ran almost the length of a horrifically torn-up pitch, or probably a mud bath, on his own and mugged off a certain Lovren 3 times on his way to putting the hosts back in front. But then there was some controversy right at the end, as Zenit were potentially awarded a controversial penalty. David, what did you think of Rubin's performance? I can imagine you're pretty ecstatic about it.
Oh yeah, it was phenomenal. It was a great performance. You know, we've done the double overs in it now. We've won twice, both of them 2-1 wins, and it was just some game. You know, we as we recall, obviously last week against Spartak, we had I think 3 players booked who were then to be missing this game. So we went into the game with Abugar and Shatov missing, obviously in the centre of midfield, big losses. And Begic was missing as well, although not necessarily such a big loss. I thought it was Aremovic, it was Begic who had been booked. So yeah, we're going into this game with our main centre midfield pairing. So we started Leon Musayev and Darko Jevtic, who I was much maligned Darko Jevtic when he first signed. I just wasn't seeing anything from him, but he's really come on the last couple of months or so and has really become a good player for us. But it's a worry. Leon Musayev making his first start for us against his former side there, and to make matters worse, then after about 15 minutes, Musayev goes off after a horrible clash of heads with Aremovic. Both of them went for the same ball, head. I don't know what actually happened to Musayev, but it looked like basically he'd probably lost a couple of teeth. Like his whole mouth was just covered in blood. He got stretchered off. It was a horrible collision. So then in centre midfield, we had Darko Jevtic playing next to normal striker or attacking player Mikhail Kostyukov. So I was then bemoaning our luck because at this point, Zenit had hit the post twice in the first 20 minutes. They'd started brightly. Rubin were largely on the defensive. Wendell and Douglas Santos were very good down the left, taking advantage of Makarov's slight lack of defensive awareness or effort. You know, there was a lot of space for them, and Wendell was really good, particularly excellent, I thought. So yeah, early doors, Azmoun hit the post twice in the first 20 minutes. You know, both of those could easily have gone in. I mean, at half time, Azmoun could well have had 4 goals because Dupin then made 2 excellent saves before half time to deny Azmoun. Not to mention then he scored in the second half as well. So yeah, we were riding our luck a bit that first half, and I was not feeling it when Kostyukov came in. I was worried. I was thinking it was bad enough at the start, and then Kostyukov come in, and he was looking a bit lost for a while. I remember the Azmoun chance that hit the post. It was Kostyukov. He'd let him go. He had a free header for the second one. I was like, damn, if that's going to keep on happening, this is not going to go well. But he ended up being one of the best players on the pitch. He really picked up and grew into the role in the second half and was making interceptions and blocks all over the place. So I give him full credit for putting effort into playing in a position that he's probably never played in or very rarely played in before. And then we sort of grew into the game a little bit as the half went on, We're getting a bit of confidence. Obviously, we did get a penalty, as you had mentioned. It was harsh. I thought it was harsh. Maybe the rules just changed. Maybe I don't know the rules as well as I thought. From what I gather, obviously the penalty was given for handball. Despot for what I thought, had made a cross. He hit Kazyaev in the midriff and bounced onto his hand. It very clearly hit his hand, but it hit his body first. As far as I knew, the rule was if it's the player's body before the hand, it's not handball. But from what I could gather, they seemed to assume that Despot had taken a shot, and apparently handball blocking a shot, even if it does hit the body first, would still be counted as handball. It didn't look like a shot to me. It was nowhere near on target if it was a shot. But I said, I don't know what the rule is, but they give it. I'm not going to turn it down. We've had some very poor VAR decisions go against us. Starfelt has been penalised twice for very weak handballs in the past, so I'm taking those all day. He slots it away, and we ride out the rest of the half relatively well. The pitch did not ride it out very well. It was, from the start, it was every time someone took a step, it was just the turf seemed to be getting stuck in the boots and just tearing up. It was in a horrible state. I think the night before I read it had been -18 in Kazan. And obviously, it's we've just come out of a long winter as well, and they are still in the midst of winter. So the pitch was in a horrible state after the first half, and it just got worse during the second half. And Rubin's set up in the second half was let's just defend. And we did, for the most part, do quite well with the defending. Zenit were quite limited with chances that they had, like actual chances. They had a lot of possession, but actual extreme chances there wasn't a great deal. Kazyaev putting a volley just past the post was the best one that I can recall. Wendell had a couple of long shots which Chupin saved quite well, or not even well, just comfortably. And I was starting to think, if it got to a point where I thought to myself, I actually looked at how many points we'd be on if we won the game. I thought, I hope this doesn't jinx me. And then 2 minutes later, Zenit equalised. That's fuck. So at that point, I was fully expecting Zenit to win. They had the momentum. It's a classic Zenit thing to do, to equalise late in the game and take the full momentum and go on and score a winner, right? That's a classic Zenit thing to do. And they fully put on the pressure. They weren't really getting anywhere still, though. They were not getting clear-cut chances. And then the magic of injury time happened. Despot played an absolute peach of a ball. I don't know why he was back there in the box. Perhaps tactical decision, because he's maybe not as mobile as a guy like Makarov or Kuicha. So Despot had dropped quite deep. He was inside our own penalty box, picked up a loose cross, pinged it first time. It was an incredible ball, really, given the circumstances. Straight into Makarov's path, and then he did the rest. The videos out there on the Russian Premier League's Twitter feed. It was just classic Makarov. I was expecting him to just take a shot early, because that he can be, he loves a shot. But I've seen plenty of clips of him doing chops. There was a quick clip that Rubin had put on their Instagram recently to the Benny Hill theme tune, with him just doing about 6 or 7 chops in a row past one of the Rubin defenders in training, like just chopping back and forth for about 10 or 15 seconds. So it's not out of his character to do that, and he sat Lovren and Santos down and stuck it in. And I was dancing for joy. It was a work day. It was on Monday, and I was working, but I was still dancing for joy. Like jumping for joy more than I have at an Arsenal game for a while, definitely. And I just thought, we've actually won. That was that. And then God, I went from 100 to 0 very quickly with the Zenit penalty at the end. I didn't think it was a penalty. I know you argued, obviously, that it was potentially a poor decision to make the challenge at what he did, and maybe it was. Maybe it was because he was maybe going nowhere. I think at that point Rubin was just desperate to chuck their body in front of anything, and he clearly gets the ball. He clicks the ball onto Sutormin, and then there is contact between then Starfelt's leg and Sutormin's torso, or midriff. I don't know. It seemed like basically 2 penalties in the game. I didn't think either of them were penalties, honestly, but he gave it. And then Zuba obviously is normally, he's usually Mr. Calm, Mr. Cool on the penalties, right? He just does the little start step and slots it into the opposite corner from where the keeper's going. But for whatever reason, it did not work. and Dupin grabbed it quite easily, and that was that. Fantastic win for Rubin. We've against the big teams this season, we've done very well. Other than Loco, we've beaten CSKA twice, we've beaten Zenit twice, beaten Spartak once, and lost once. Loco's the only team out of the typical big four, if I'm not including Krasnodar, who we've not managed to get a win against. So now we need to take that into the rest of the season and try and convert our poorer performances earlier in the season, which a lot of them coincided with the lack of despot on the pitch, and do well against the smaller teams. There's a couple of big fixtures later in the season. Week 25, we got Rostov, and Loco have got Sochi or Spartak. I forget which one. So that's a big game week, because we're now tied on 34 points with Loco and Rostov. It was annoying to see that we'd beaten Zenit and Spartak in the last week, and we're still in 8th. But that's just a shape of how tight it is. Between 3rd place Spartak and 8th place Rubin, there's only 4 points. So yeah, we're really set up for it. But we did tremendously well. We just defended for our lives, limited Zenit. I think we took the warning signs that Zenit had early on with the 2 Azmoun chances. Relied on Dupin for some heroics late on, and we took our win. It was a great game.
What I really enjoyed about Rubin's twin matches, I suppose the 2 big victories they've had the last 2 weeks, is that they're both entirely different performances. Zenit was very much a backs against the wall defensive shutout. Spartak, they really got in Spartak's face and pressed high, and it just shows that Rubin have got defensive flexibility to really deal with what they need to deal with, and it was excellent. On the penalties, I thought the second one, the Zenit penalty was quite, the one late on for Zenit was quite harsh on Starfelt, I think it was, but he's putting himself in a silly position by making the tackle in the first place. He's given the referee a decision to make. He doesn't need to do that. He just needs to shepherd the man out of play. He's going nowhere. But the penalty itself was a little bit harsh. There was contact, but contact doesn't necessarily mean it's a foul. That's one thing that a lot of referees really do interpret wrong. The first one, though, the handball, I thought was just absolutely scandalous. Now, I remember saying in our RFN chat at the time that I wasn't really sure how that decision was going to go either way, or whether I thought it was right either way, to be honest, because the rules of the game in general, from the very top down, is just such a ridiculous mess at the moment in terms of handball. So I have grabbed a copy of the rules right now, and it literally states that there will be no penalty if the ball touches a player's hand/arm immediately from their own head/body/foot, or the head/body/foot of another player. Now, it does have caveats later on that anything that stops a direct goal or goal scoring opportunity would be given. But that really is that how it's either they don't know that rule about it hitting somebody else first, or you're putting another part of your body first, which is kind of worrying if that's the case, or they interpreted that as a goal scoring opportunity or direct or potential direct goal. Which that's really vague if that's the case.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as I said, it definitely hit the body first. The only way I thought, if they didn't interpret it as a shot, if they interpreted it as a goal scoring chance, based on where the cross was going, maybe it was going direct to Makarov, who was free, but you still wouldn't say it would have been a high XG chance, for example.
Yeah.
It would have been, he would have still had to, because the ball was aerial, obviously. It wasn't on the ground. It would still have to have taken the touch and presumably executed a shot or found the room for a shot. So yeah, it did seem harsh to say. I thought both penalties were dodgy, and obviously that's the second game in a row where we would have been in a match with some dodgy decisions. Obviously last week there was some very soft yellow cards for both sides. Neither game has the decisions favoured one team or the other. It's just the standard of refereeing, but not even that. I'm willing to give some leeway to the refs with the amount of rules and rule changes that are currently ongoing, and the pressure they are under to interpret it in a short amount of time. Granted, they still took 5 minutes to interpret it. I think that the incident happened in the 35th, and the penalty wasn't taken until the 40th. So it took them a while still, but yeah, I'll admit there was potentially some fortune to that. But I say we've had our fair share of bad calls, I feel, this season, so I'm willing to take one going for us.
Yeah, I think it also highlights VAR. A lot of the football world was sold on VAR by the authorities, by the technology makers, and whoever else who pushed for it, TV companies mainly. That these sort of decisions, like, say, it would take both Rubin games last week, where the yellow card's a real fine line between, is it a foul, is it a yellow? I've seen it interpret this way and that way. You can really see both sides of the argument and think, yeah, that's an understandable case. With both of these decisions, you can see why the rules are being interpreted as a penalty, but also entirely why it isn't. And we were all sold as a football community with that these fine line decisions were really going to be solved by VAR. And if anything, the introduction of VAR has just magnified how difficult this is and made it an absolute mockery, to be honest, across the world. It didn't VAR right now in Russia's not even working at half the grounds because it's too snowy for offside calls to be made. What? That technology is horrendous, and it's really exacerbated the issue. I feel like I said, I feel sorry for some of the referees who, when I see a referee, I ask him consistency is not necessarily consistency to the rule book as a black and white example, because if that's the case, every single tug and push in the box is penalty. But it's their own internal consistency. If they interpret something one way, then they continue to do so, and continual inconsistency of their interpretation, because the rules are so messed up right now. It's absolutely crazy, and it's really making referees and their decisions stand out a lot more. But to move back to the football itself, Richard, discussing people who stood out, do you think, was there any players in particular from either side who stood out for you on the day?
I'll echo David's thoughts that I thought Wendell had a good game for Zenit. He looked very lively in the first half, and in the second half he had a nice, good few shots at goal, which Yuri Dupin saved with a relative degree of comfort, but they were on target. And yeah, he was, I think, one of the most productive players for Zenit in the midfield for them, Wendell. As for Rubin, I was really impressed with their left flank, actually, of both Ilya Samoshnikov and Kvicha. They caught my eye. I've actually been impressed with Samoshnikov a lot in the Rubin matches that I've seen this season. He's a good, steady, consistent performer for them. Always consistent. Seems to have good 7 to 8 out of 10 games. And he's a player, in my opinion, who I believe that the Russian national team should be considering calling up for the March internationals. I think he's 23 years of age, so he's a good age, and he certainly could be a future left fullback for Spornaya. Him and Dmitry Skopintsev look like they could have quite a strong fight going forward for the starting spot for the Russian national team. And I was really impressed with Yuri Dupin in goal as well. I mean, he's always very consistent. He's another one who I think certainly should be considered for a Russia call-up. That penalty save at the end, great composure under pressure. And all game he's just very consistent. Dupin, he holds balls well. He's a good shot stopper. He's been such a brilliant discovery since he was bought by Rubin from Anji, and Anji impressed before that. A real late bloomer a real late bloomer career wise. And he's I think at 33 now, becoming one of the best keepers in the league, and I certainly think is worthy of being in discussions for the Euros even. I know he's not had a cap yet, but he certainly should be being considered and called up, in my opinion. So yeah, there was those people stood out. Kvicha as well. He's always involved in games. And I remember a couple of early touches he had early doors where he was giving Karavayev a hard time. I think he drew a few fouls from that Zenit right side. So yeah, they were the people who really stood out to me. And Makarov's winning goal was brilliant. I mean, it even got on Bleacher Report. They published a video of it, which is some good coverage for the league as well. And and I'll give him a lot of credit. His dribbling skills on that pitch, and it was a cabbage patch of a pitch as well. It really was terrible. It was tearing up, as David said, when the players were just moving on it. And to show such good close ball control there, and basically just turns Zenit's defenders inside out and the run as well. and then the finish was nice and composed, was brilliant. And it's brilliant to see what Rubin are doing, and what Slutsky's doing at Rubin. He's taken players like Samoshnikov and Makarov from the FNL, and he's really developing them. And Despotovic was an excellent signing up front on a free. And I'm really impressed with his work there. And Rubin battled hard for that win. And those players were key to it. That left side of Samoshnikov, Kvicha, and Dupin in goal.
Yeah, certainly. I think Dupin's continuing his excellent season. The header, I think Dupin was duped by. I know I say that a lot. It's a good word. But he kind of, if he didn't, he tried to come for the cross, realised he was in no man's land, had to take a step back, and by the time he'd done that, yes, he got the Azmoun's header and nearly saved it, but if he hadn't made that slight mistake, he would have probably been there to easily gather the ball up. But I don't want to be too harsh on him because he was peppered so much and he was under so much pressure for the entire game. And that penalty save was excellent. He kept his cool when it mattered, so not a big issue, but I thought he was excellent for the rest of the match. David, one word answer. Can Rubin sneak into Europe?
Yeah.
And Richard, one word answer. Is this a stumble for Zenit or a little bit more worrying in the long term?
Stumble so far, but could be worrying if they don't beat AKhmat at the weekend. So big game at the weekend for Zenit.
That was definitely more than one word.
I think you cheated. I think you cheated everyone.
Yeah, one sentence answer.
Now, if we move on, before the game, there was an interesting interview that appeared on Sport Express, and that was a certain Nikita Vasyukin. Now, he was an analyst who was at Zenit for 3.5-4 years, and he left Zenit for Rubin in the summer. And in this interview, it was quite in-depth and revealing, especially about his time at Zenit. Understandably, he didn't discuss too much about Rubin because he's currently being paid for and works for Rubin. But on Zenit, this first part that we want to discuss, he spoke about the relationship at the club between Javier Rebalta and Sergei Semak. And he said that at Rubin, they work closely together, the directors and the manager. In my opinion, Semak and Rebalta did not always find a common language. Sometimes it was hard to understand what we were looking for specifically, what the requirements were that they have for the players. We were just trying to find a good footballer. Richard, do you think that this disconnect, perhaps, that he is alluding to, do you think that's potentially evident in how transfer Zenit go around some of their business at times?
Well, I mean, it can't help. It is interesting. I saw that earlier today. I was reading it, and it's a bit of a troubling look, isn't it? And it is interesting to see what I'm really fascinated to see what will happen from now to end of the season going forward at Zenit, because we were all staying at the start of the season. Semak, he looked very secure on the back of 2 league titles, and even though they went out of Europe before Christmas last season, the performance in the Champions League was still quite good. They were unlucky in both the games against Leipzig. They performed well in their home matches. They beat both Benfica and Lyon at home. Lyon made Champions League semi-finals, of course, beating Man City. So even though they went out in the group stage and didn't make Europe after Christmas, they were unlucky. They finished bottom of the group with 7 points. So you thought going into this season, right, now we really want to see Zenit kick on, but it's just not. Yeah, something's just not quite right. Performances have dropped big time in Europe. And since the restart, Zenit have looked a bit slack, and I'm still convinced it's just a blip at the moment. But they don't win against AKhmat at the weekend, this could really become problematic. And the Zenit hierarchy will certainly, if they creep over the line to a title, if the performances don't start improving, then they're going to have a decision to make on Semak in the summer, because this is becoming a little bit concerning now. And there are some decent managers out of work this summer who are going to be on the market. So it's some interesting times. But yeah, these comments, it's been a real interesting revelation when we were all reading that earlier today.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it does really get highlighted when you continue on with Nikita's comments. And in particular, he spoke about Malcolm, the big money signing in 2019. And about Malcolm, he said that when he came in the summer of 2019, when he needed, Semak needed an attacking player on the right flank with a left foot, that was what we determined the team lacked. The ability to beat a man one-on-one with high quality penetrating passes and who could create chances in the semi-flank and the central zones. The research department will never suggest a player like Malcolm. You can't even think that such a player is available to go to a Russian club. One of our first candidates for the position was Rafinha, who then played for Sporting, moved on to Rennes, and now plays for Leeds in the Premier League. We appreciated him very highly. He fit into the budget that was announced to us for much less money than Malcolm. And he continues on by saying that it's the fact that a player like Malcolm would not have went to the RPL because many would prefer, say, the French league as a springboard and not the Russian one. But the club decided to sign Malcolm, even though we had not, the analytical department had not done the research in such a situation. So, David, what do you think about this? But about Malcolm, it's typical Zenit, really, isn't it? To go out there and get the big money signing when potentially there's better options elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, and I'll give the leader some leeway, some slack, because obviously Malcolm is a good player. He came with a good background. Granted, it was a hefty price tag, but it's a guy who's played for Barcelona. He's going to be good, and obviously they've been unlucky with his injuries. But you have an analytics department for a reason, and you need to listen to them and use them. What's the point in having them if you're just going to go over the heads and buy some other guy who they've not even looked at? But as we've discussed before, maybe not even on podcast, but we've discussed before, it's just the Zenit way. Since the big money spending back in the 2000s on Hulk and Witsel, they've sort of set a precedent of being the big Russian club who can attract the big names. And it's the Zenit thing now where, in order to uphold this reputation of being the biggest and being the best, and to probably try and keep the reputation that they had with Hulk and Witsel, who were, who really, if you ask anyone who doesn't care for Russian football, name someone who played in Russia, you'd probably bet that Hulk or Witsel would probably be in one of the first 3 or 5 names they would say. So they've set this precedent where they Zenit thrive off their reputation. Obviously, the money from the Champions League is big, but that in terms of reputation, they like to stick with that. And so Malcolm was just, as Vesukin said in his interview, Malcolm just fitted what the leadership wanted or needed in terms of, let's get a big name in for some publicity, some popularity, try and grow the club's stature. Whereas if they had, let's just say Rafinha was willing to come and they did make it happen. That's a player who we've seen now at Leeds is performing very, very well in the Premier League. Obviously, we don't know how injuries might have gone, or adaptation, or anything like that. It's hard to say that, yes, it would have been a better signing than Malcolm, because anything can happen. Malcolm might not have got injured. Rafinha might have got injured. But it's not great for them to obviously go over their heads. But we know that's what Zenit will be like in the market. They're not going to go out there and sign young talents all the time. Obviously, they had that little flurry in Argentina a few years back with the guys, and let's be honest, 1 or maybe 2 of those 5 they bought in, Paredes and Driussi, they're the only real successes that have come out of that splurge. So yeah, not a surprise at all, really, to hear of some mismanagement at Zenit or at any Russian club. Let's be honest, there's going to be stuff going on all over the shop because, as we know from someone like Fedun, they sometimes are the ones that know the best as far as they're concerned. So yeah, concerning, but not altogether unsurprising.
Yeah, I think maybe I was a little bit harsh on Zenit. If a player like Malcolm becomes available, then and you can afford him, you can sign him, then maybe you do have to go for that option. It's not like even Vesukin saying himself, he's not saying that Malcolm wouldn't be a good fit or wouldn't be such a good signing. It was actually saying that we didn't do the research because he seemed so far out of their range, which is entirely fair enough. But one player who was in their range and the signs in that January overhaul alongside Wilmar Barrios and Jaroslav Rakitsky was Sardar Azmoun. And Vasukin's comments about Azmoun were that he could safely play in the top league at a club that's fighting for European Cups. But there is a question regarding his defensive qualities. At Zenit, he's greatly relieved of the hard work and could put pressure on one possession and then rest for 3 possessions. In Europe, these requirements are different. If you were going to, say, Leeds, for example, then no matter how strong of an attacker you are in attack, in defence you must constantly press and play one-on-one against the opponent's defenders. Now he gives another few examples here of Ciro Immobile for Lazio, of Dortmund's attackers, Porto's, different clubs. And he says that Azmoun runs about 9 kilometres per 90 metres and takes very long pauses when the team is defending. This is not good or bad, but it's just conditions to one which one must adapt. For example, Messi generally runs 8 kilometres, but makes a large, huge difference in attack. So it's just quite an interesting one about Azmoun, about how he's basically the perfect man for a club who's going to dominate possession and territory for the majority of games. Do you think, Richard?
Yeah, I'd go with that. Yeah. Also, like I say, with regarding to the running stats, so he mentioned Immobile there as well, and about him running, I think it was something like 11 kilometers in 90 minutes. So that's obviously 2k per match more than Azmoun, and I think it's great in the RPL for a team like Zenit, who obviously will, be on the front foot most games, will be playing probably against a lot of teams who are sitting deeper. But I think as the Champions League showed us this season, when you're playing against higher intensity opponents like Borussia Dortmund and Lazio in top 5 European leagues, you can tell like we all watch other football apart from the Russian Premier League. We watch also, the English Premier League. I watch quite a lot of Serie A and La Liga in addition to Premier League matches, and you can tell when you're watching a top 5 league that the Leeds example is quite interesting. Yeah, you have to work off the ball, and it's generally just a lot more. The pace of the game is quicker, the tempo of the game is quicker. You really do have to be on it right from the start, and yeah, Azmoun has been perfect for the RPL, and I do think, like I said, certainly going to throw my hat into the ring and say that he has got the potential to play abroad. We've seen him in a top 5 league. We've seen him recently linked with Sevilla, which was quite an interesting link. But yeah, it sums up where he's going to have to go with his game, because when you play for a top 5 league, the standard of the opponents that you're playing against is higher, and you're going to have to get used to a higher tempo and intensity. And so that's something obviously he'll have to adapt. I think he can adapt, but it also probably sheds a light there on perhaps Zenit's inability this season to really perform well at all in Europe, because when they come up against high caliber opponents than what they're used to domestically, and the tempo of the game increases, then they've come up short, unfortunately.
Yeah, certainly. It's quite similar to Kento Hashimoto's comments that we discussed quite a few pods ago. I think it was either just after the winter break or before the winter break, one of the two, where he mentioned that the Japanese league, in his eyes, is far more technical than the Russian league. But it's also considerably slower. It's a considerably easier game, and not in terms of easy opponents, but it's an easier game to play for him from a physical point of view. And that's kind of the next step up from Russia to the top 5 is that, like you said, Richard, that intensity just increases massively. And one player who has got a huge amount of intensity and a huge amount of promise as well is actually move over to Rubin. And it's Vasukin was asked about a certain Kavisha. And on him, he said that he is one of the key players in our team. He's one of the best players in the league in his position. It's clear that, first of all, it's worth talking about his talent and the data himself, the work of the coaches with him, the work done by himself. He's got a very varied dribbling, not only on clean balls but also within close contact. If he gets the ball away, he can get away. Basically, he's improved a lot physically over the past year. The qualities where he needs to improve are the final ball, the completion of the attack, and the creation of chance. Slutsky and the coaching staff constantly focus on that with him. A lot of the training drills are aimed at making the winners and centre play better at the end. After every friendly game, there's a lot of theoretical work. The coach pays a lot of attention when to sharpen and when to play more accurately. He's becoming a more mature footballer week in, week out. if he either constantly climbed into a stroke, beat two, and then went to a third, he'd now be looking for an option to save the ball. Now, we'll mention Kavisha, and we'll end Rubin Zenit on that because he's been linked to Juve, Milan, and Dortmund in today's press and a few other clubs. David, does this match with what you hear a lot about Kavicha in training, where he is, and you can see he's maturing every week, but that Slutsky works a lot with him?
Well, we certainly know that Slutsky is focusing a lot on him. You know, we've said in previous in a previous pod that he's given basically Kavicha the free will to express himself on the pitch. You know, he encourages him to run with the ball at any opportunity he can. And, you know, it's something we've been saying. Obviously, he is very young. He's only just turned 20. But we said a lot over the last year when he was showing promise and he was always looking like a bright player on the pitch that, you know, while he was beating players a lot, he needed to improve his final decision or his final execution of the pass or the shot, whatever it may be. Despite, you know, at that point, he was still progressing the ball very well, which he does, or creating chances. You know, he's one of the best chance creators in the Premier League. Despite his sometimes poor execution, he's still creating chances just because of the sheer volume of times that he does what he does. But we're definitely seeing, I think, from this time last year to this time this year, he's made huge leaps and bounds. I think I noticed big time over the winter break in those friendlies, he was looking very, very good, especially when it came to the final ball. Like I think he scored 3 or 4 goals and assisted a number of goals in 5 matches as well over the winter break. So yeah, he's definitely improving a lot. He's being encouraged a lot. You know, Richard mentioned earlier about Slutsky developing Samoshnikov and Kavicha. And he's got a pedigree in doing that with guys like Golovin and Martin Odegaard and Jared Bowen at Hull. So ideally, he's in a very good place to develop further. Whether he goes anywhere is another question. You know, arguably and undoubtedly, clubs are going to be scouting him. You know, it's a young player who's got some of the highest dribbling stats in all of Europe. That's not going to go unnoticed. And this is probably just the first time we're getting wind of it in the press. But yeah, he's definitely coming on. And I think every week almost at the moment, he's looking better and better. Even against Zenit, he didn't even necessarily have a flashy game or a good game. And maybe that's a good thing. That, you know, he was just doing what he did and he did most things well. Didn't always dribble the ball. You know, had chances. Second half, he was just part of the unit that helped defend. You know, for that last goal that we scored the winner, he was back on the edge of our box with everyone else, and Makarov was the only guy up the pitch. So yeah, he's a very, very promising player, as we all know. Very exciting player to watch. And I think from what I can gather, he's not the kind of player like Ignatiev, whose mentality isn't there. Ignatiev seems like a classic sort of young Russian player who's happy with the money that he's getting. You know, he's got a lot of flashy stuff, a lot of flashy cars. Kavicha just seems to really enjoy his football and seems to always work hard from what I see in the videos on social media of training. And that's a good sign. That's what clubs will be looking for when they're looking at players. You know, young players. I'm taking a lot from Arsene Wenger's book, which I just read recently. But he was saying that between the ages of 18 and 22, that's key in a player's development. So this is the key part in his career where he should be growing into the player that he will eventually be for the peak of his career. So he needs to be playing regularly, which he is, and he needs to be improving regularly, which I also think he is. So yeah, I think there's a lot of promise here. You know, there's still work to be done, but there's a lot of promise, and I think we're definitely seeing signs of change. And I think his teammates will be happy about that as well. Obviously, we have heard that they were maybe getting frustrated with his occasional over selfishness, but I think that will change. And yeah, very, very exciting player.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of promise in Kavicha. And if we move on to the next game, where there's not necessarily a lot of promise, but there is definitely a lot of promise, and that was Spartak return to winning ways. I knew I'd get a reaction on that one. And piled the misery upon struggling Krasnodar with a huge 6-1 victory at the Otkrity at the weekend. Jordan Larson and Sanya Sobolev both scored a brace each. The latter actually was on his birthday, becoming the first player for Spartak since Lewis Robson to score a brace on his birthday, while Promes got his early goal, as well as Ezekiel Ponce. Yuri Kaczynski did score an excellent long-range one for the visitors in reply, but this was a real potent attacking performance from Spartak and much needed after 3 defeats in a row. So David, first, just do you think this scoreline maybe flatters Spartak a little bit? Because the game was very close at one point, especially around this Maximenko save and then the 2 goals that really in 2 minutes that went in, that kind of killed the game a little bit for Krasnodar.
Yeah, I mean, definitely so. Spartak took the early lead with some, they played really well early doors. Obviously scored within the first 63 seconds. The second goal, Larson with an incredible pass through for Promes. But then after that, they barely had a shot. I think they had one more shot before then. It was just all Krasnodar for the rest of the second half. And that carried on early in the second half. And as you say, there was the huge chance which fell to Remy Cavella, where Sasha Maximenko has made an incredible reflex stop to prevent that header from going in, and which was followed up by a goal line clearance from Samuel Gigo. Maximenko's save had just stopped it from going in and gave Gigo the chance to get the final touch to keep it out. And that goes in early second half. That probably rattles the nerves a bit for Spartak. Obviously, Kaczynski then did score about 10 minutes later. Obviously, belted from distance. They'd had other chances before that, and it was then strange. They'd had all these big chances, and then it was this just rocket out of nowhere, which 25-yarder to top corner. No one could do anything about it, which finally broke the deadlock. And they kept on going, but they were doing classic Krasnodar, where they were pressing very high. They had a makeshift back line. I think Yonov was playing right back, which obviously he was naturally going to push up. Being a winger as a natural. And at that point, it really was on tenterhooks. I was watching the game, and I remember thinking, the next goal is going to be crucial here. If Krasnodar get it, this is going to be a tasty finish. But that wasn't the case. Krasnodar probably overpressured, overpushed, left themselves open on the counter, conceded on that very quick counter attack with Sobolev finishing it off. And they didn't learn from that. And 2 minutes later, the same thing happened off corner. And then it went from 2-1, which could have potentially been 2-2 at any particular moment because Krasnodar were pushing hard, to suddenly being 4-1 Spartak from two attacks, 2 goals, 2 attacks in 2 minutes. And after that, anything could happen in that game. It was, the game was done already, and Krasnodar were probably just following the exact same as normal. They were still trying to attack. Obviously, they were playing with a makeshift back line and a very young and experienced keeper. And Spartak just carried on plugging away and obviously got another 2 towards the end. I think at that point, obviously, all the confidence was gone from Krasnodar. But yeah, it was definitely, maybe not flattered, but it was, if someone said, wow, 6-1, Spartak dominated, that wasn't necessarily the story of the game. And I think at half time, or when Kaczynski scored, if someone had said to you, this is going to finish 6-1 to Spartak, most people would have said no chance, because Krasnodar were really on the ascendancy. But that's just how football goes. It can swing one way and then it all falls apart, and that's what happened.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'd watched the first 2 goals and then had to turn the game off to make some food for my family, and then came back to the game afterwards and kind of messaged our chat and was incredulous. What, 6-1? Because at that point, Krasnodar were well on top. It just showed that how quickly things can change in football, and Richard, on Krasnodar's disappointing performance and continued disappointing performances, which has went on for quite some time, do you think that Krasnodar will qualify for Europe? And is it maybe a good thing if they don't?
Well, they're already, Dinamo are in 5th place with 36 points. Krasnodar are in 9th on 31, so they're already 5 points off. And there's a whole host of teams who are playing a lot better than them at the moment in terms of form, like Rubin are playing better than them in terms of form, Dynamo are better than them in terms of form, Sochi, Spartak. So it's going to be a real, and Lokomotiv as well, so it's going to be a real challenge for them to make Europe next season. Truth be told, I don't actually think it might not be a bad thing for them to miss Europe for next season, especially if they're going to conduct a rebuild. Because as we were saying on the pod a couple of weeks ago, that they need to really rejig some of them foreign spots, and we still don't know whether the foreign limit's going to change or not. There was some cautious talk of possibly going up to 12. That's all it is at the minute. Cautious talk. We've not heard anything definitive. But yeah, maybe missing Europe and having a year out and rebuilding might not necessarily be the worst thing in the world, because qualifying for Europe now is going to be really tough, because fifth place might not even get you it, depending on who wins the Russian Cup. So at the minute, I'm probably inclined to think probably going to rule them out of qualifying for Europe, although they've got a match against Tambov at the weekend, so you'd assume they'll win that, but it's certainly going to be a fight for them, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think they will either. Of course, they'll miss the money, they'll miss the lure of European football for getting the foreign names in to fill up those quota spots in the team. But I agree. I think too many of their foreigner spots are either players who are old, like Berg, granted excellent against Dinamo Zagreb in the first leg, or are just sick notes. There's so many of them that are sick notes, and this injury crisis at Krasnodar is crazy, because a lot of it is just bad luck. You can't put ACLs and leg breaks and these type of injuries, the way that they are getting them, from pretty just like innocuous but robust challenges, and that's not down to training or a poor pitch or anything like that. That's pure just shit luck. And to get what was the left back the sign called? I can't even remember his name, because he was only there for about 10 minutes and then got injured.
Ambrose Oyongo.
Yeah, he was only there for 10 minutes to replace the left back who's already out for the season. Then he gets sent out for the season and gets sent back to France. But on Spartak and their excellent performance, now Quincy Promes has had 2 games back. The first one, he very much looked like a man who hadn't really played any competitive football for a very long time, because of a bizarre cloud hanging over his head regarding some police issues in Holland, without getting into it further because he can't yet. The other one, though, was really enigmatic and linked up with Jordan Larson in particular very nicely on the day against Krasnodar. David, which one do you maybe expect to see going ahead? Is it going to be the good old Quincy Promes back again, maybe, on the evidence of the weekend?
It'll be hard to say. I didn't think he blew Krasnodar apart. I think Larson was definitely the bet. Just in my thought, I thought Larson was the key player on the day. Promes did his bit. He scored the goal from the easy chance that he had, and he sprinted away and set up the easy assist. He didn't have to do anything difficult in the game, but he didn't also then have a bad game like I would have said he did against Rubin, where he was largely invisible. But it shows that he's growing back into the flow, the pace of the game. It's a step down, which you might say in terms of pace might be easier, might be more difficult. Maybe it's a step up, actually. I don't know, compared to the Eredivisie and the RPL. So yeah, I think he's probably just settling back into the flow and the team. Obviously, he's got completely new teammates than what he had the first time. So he's got to learn how his team play. He's got to readapt and gel with the squad. So it's going to take some time to get him used to it. I think we'll see a little bit of inconsistency over the next few games where he'll have flashes, and there probably will be games where he's probably not as good as he was, where he puts in another Rubin performance, just while he's gelling back with his teammates. But the way Spartak are playing, then there's always going to be chances for him. They're scoring a lot. So yeah, he should just be a solid part of that team as they push for a potential title challenge, or certainly for a top 5. It looks unlikely that they're going to drop out of the top 5 at this rate. So back in Europe for this season at the very least.
As the interested neutral, David, would you say that if you're Promes, would you rather have the partnership from the cup-winning team of Zilovic, Luis Adriano and Fernando, or Sobolev, Larson and Alex Kral playing alongside you?
You'd probably want a mixture. I'd want Fernando in the midfield, but Adriano and Zilovic were not the most mobile forwards, whereas Larson's very similar to Promes in some ways. Where well, not even similar, but they have a more direct style compared to Zeluish and Adriano. Those two would never really dribble with the ball particularly, whereas Larson and Promes are very comfortable doing that. Ponce is not really like that. I would say Ponce is quite similar to Asmoon in some senses. They're just penalty box strikers. Put them in the box, they'll try and get on the end of stuff and do things like that. So you'd probably want a mixture. If from talking from his perspective, you'd want Fernando there rather than Krau, who's probably got the more creativity. But up front, you have then replaced Adriano Zeluish with Larson and Sobolev or Ponce, who probably do then offer the bit extra creativity. So if you had a mixture of both, then it'd be ideal. And I think in general, I'd probably lean more to the current setup. But Fernando does have a lot of strengths. But maybe the two big men, as I'm going to say, they're not exactly big, but they're the less mobile strikers of the olden days. Maybe they were more beneficial to Promes' game, to allow them to. Maybe they did the hold-up play better enough for Promes to run off them. So hard to say really, but I think I couldn't pick. It would be a mixture, definitely.
Yeah, and that really leads into my next question, where in the last game, during the winter, Tedesco was experimented with a back four quite a lot. And in the game against Rubin, it was definitely more so of a flat 4-4-2. Now against Krasnodar, he changed back to his favourite formation of the 3-4-3, and which Promes really had a free role in behind Larson and Sobolev. So Richard, quickly on Tedesco, we've seen him field that back four and now back three. So which one do you think is better for Spartak, and maybe better for getting the best out of Promes? Because previously, I mean, the first one, the back four, where Spartak really didn't look very creative or strong at all, was what Promes' old best position was when he was cutting in off the left-hand side, doing what he wants under Carrera. Do you think maybe that the back three, where he's got a more central free role, is maybe now more conducive to getting the best out of Promes in the long term?
I really like that three-man formation, James, at the weekend. I really like that formation indeed, because obviously Spartak have been familiar, the rest of the players have been familiar playing that formation all year. I also think Victor Moses had a good game for Spartak too. I think on the first goal, I think it was, he combined quite. The second goal, sorry, it was that he combined quite well. I think he gave the pass to Larson, who then threaded the ball through for Promes to score. So I think I'd probably stick with that formation going forward now, with Promes in a central free role, because then it allows you to have two strikers. And then obviously, the only other change you'd probably consider making to that lineup is probably Zobnin in for Umyarov when he's back from his red card suspension. Although I thought Umyarov had a very good game, and that's a nice encouraging sign to see for Spartak going forward. But yeah, that three-man, that 3-5-2 formation, I think, is something I persist with going forward. I think Spartak look really good in it. Promes adds an extra dimension to that. I think, there's been some times this season where you could argue Spartak have probably lacked a little bit of spark at the tip of the three, but I think he can give them that now. Kral's all energy style in midfield will complement that too. And I really love Jordan Larson for Spartak. His performance was absolutely outstanding. He was by far the best player on the pitch against Krasnodar. Just important. I just hope he stays clear of suspension and injury, because he's the natural second striker in that team, and he doesn't really have a backup. So it is important that he stays fit for Spartak, and he was outstanding. So yeah, I'd like to see them stick with this 3-5-2 going forward. For me, it looked good for Spartak. Looked a lot more. They looked a lot more penetrative and threatening playing it. And if it isn't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a real nice balance with Spartak's attack right now, where you have the prototypical target man, creative second striker, and then the penalty box poacher, as David mentioned about Ponce. You don't quite have that balance in defence yet, because they are very much a glass cannon still, but that's a lot of Tedesco's game. Speaking of Tedesco, Richard, you've seen some rumours about a potential return to Schalke on the cards, as we all know he's leaving Spartak at the end of the season.
Yes, I saw those rumours actually. I think it was last week I saw them. But I mean, we've all we've all laughed at Spartak for being a bit of a madhouse. You principally, James, because obviously you follow the club quite closely, and we all laugh at them being a bit of a madhouse. But I've actually had a look at Schalke recently. Apparently they're on the rock bottom of the Bundesliga. They look set for relegation. They couldn't even beat Mainz, who are second bottom, at home last weekend. Apparently, some people who've watched the Bundesliga that weekend got in touch with me and spoke to me, and I listened to a few podcasts, and they said it was one of the worst games they'd seen between two awful sides, and Schalke still couldn't score, and they're looking certainties for relegation to Bundesliga 2. They're in a huge amount of debt. So it's going to be a long road back to the top, and apparently they're on their fifth manager of the season and 4 other backroom staff left after they got rid of Christian Gross as well. Yeah, it's if you think Spartak's a madhouse, Schalke is an even bigger madhouse, and that takes some doing. So if I was Tedesco, yes, if you want to go back to Germany for family reasons, which I totally understand, fair enough, but Tedesco's good enough to get a 1 Bundesliga job. He's too good to be managing in the 2 Bundesliga. I think there's plenty of clubs out there who in the middle end of the Bundesliga table. I'm even thinking someone like Hertha Berlin, who've had a bit of money spent on them recently, have ambitious plans to going forward to push for Europa League, Champions League qualification on a persistent basis. I'd surely, even if I was Tedesco, be willing to wait 4, 5, 6 months for an opportunity like that, rather than go to Schalke, where there's going to be no money to spend, 2 Bundesliga football, which you're in my opinion a much better manager then. And then there's also the case of going back to Schalke after it acrimoniously ended there. I mean, I'd be a bit haphazard about going back. So, but I mean, after working in a madhouse like Spartak, who knows? Maybe a madhouse like Schalke is just probably something that might suit him. Who knows? But I'd be waiting around for a 1 Bundesliga job personally myself.
Yeah, I think that's what he'll do. I mean, he's already confirmed that he wants to go home for family reasons. And if we move across the dugout, we'll finish off again with some quick one-word fire answers, short as possible. David, do you think that Masayev will last the season as Krasnodar coach or not?
Yes.
Richard, what do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, certainly. I think he will. Galitsky's already came out on the record and claimed that he will not be sacked, even if Masayev does lose every game left. It's understandable with how Galitsky wants the club to be run from the academy as the central point. I'm not 100% sure if that's the right thing to do yet, but time will tell on that. Now, Richard, you did catch some of the Dinamo game against Tambov at the weekend. Just want to give a quick summary of that?
Yeah, it was. I think Dinamo probably should have really won that by another goal or 2. Really, they did enough though. I mean, they didn't really need to play at full intensity because we all know that Tambov are just a complete disaster show at the moment, aren't they? And Dinamo could easily have played at second, third gear and still won the game convincingly by a 2-0 scoreline. I think part of it was that Dinamo were probably saving a bit of energy for the derby against Spartak this weekend, which is totally understandable from their point of view because it's a big game in the race for the European spots. So yeah, it was another lovely game by Arsene Zakarian. By the way, he provided a lovely pinpoint assist through for Vyacheslav Grulyov, another one who Sandro Schwartz has improved. Whenever I've seen Grulyov in the past, I've thought of him as not really being a bit like Karapuzov, a bit like Anton Terekov, not quite of the quality to really make it through at Dinamo. And I mean, I'm still, when Schwartz gets the opportunity to restructure this squad in the summer a little bit, I'm still uncertain he'll be a starter. But to be fair to Grulyov, he has Vyacheslav Grulyov. To be fair to him, he has shown some good things in the last couple of games. He scored. It was a lovely, well taken goal that he got at the weekend. Lovely assist from Zakarian. And even if not a starter, he could be a useful backup option for Dinamo. And it's nice to see Schwartz having a look at him and utilising him in a couple of different roles. Thought Morrow and Szymanski were really good in midfield again. You have Geniev nice and solid at the back. So yeah, I thought it could have been better from Dinamo, but taking into consideration the opponents they were playing, I understand probably leaving a bit in the tank for the Spartak game, and I'm really looking forward to that game after Dinamo and Spartak's results at the weekend. I think it should be a very good oldest Russian derby.
And across the other side of Moscow, in the other side of the title race as well, David, how did CSKA get on in the weekend against AKhmat?
Yeah, I mean, it was comfortable for them. They didn't really break stride. Rondon started, hit the post in the first half, before then getting his first goal from the spot. It was a solid, easy penalty, a clear handball, as I recall. And then got a striker's assist in the second half. Won the second ball for a little target man knockdown header, and Vlasic volleyed home. And really, AKhmat, I can't remember AKhmat really threatening big. It wasn't like domination. There was chances for either side, possession for either side, but CSKA really didn't look too threatened. And they played as well as they needed to get the 3 points. So yeah, good to see Rondon on the score sheet. Pomazoon getting his first clean sheet back at CSKA. And I thought Ajuke had a decent cameo. He came off the bench and had a decent cameo. I think in general he's been a disappointing signing. He was come in and he looked like he was maybe going to offer similar qualities to someone like Feature with his raw dribbling and even quicker pace, but it's just not worked for him quite yet. But maybe a decent performance like he had on the weekend will be a little boost for him.
Yeah, I must admit, I was quite enthused by Ajuke's game at the weekend. He is one of those like Kavisha where ironically his weaknesses are actually quite similar, and it is in the final third of the pitch. But he seemed a lot more clinical at the weekend, and that's something that CSKA desperately need because the entire team are really not quite clinical enough. But it was a very, very solid performance, and it was good to see Rondon play so well as well, because I think that's going to be one of, if not maybe the signing of the winter. I think that's a very smart signing from CSKA, and I've mentioned before that I think it's really the final key to potentially give them what they need in the title race, and this is why the title race is kind of so interesting. Zenit are by far and away the best and most talented team in the league, but they have stumbled a little bit, and Spartak and CSKA both capitalized on that with new players starting and playing well. So it's really increasing and ramping up the pressure on Zenit, and it'll be interesting to see how Zenit cope with that. It's really the first time that they could go into the second half of the season with this sort of three-way title battle. And David, you've kept an eye on, of course, as usual, the FNL. Would you like to just go through a nice summary of some of the your key FNL action from the weekend?
Yeah, well, we had since the last week, we've had two game weeks. We had one on the weekend, and we had a whole game week on Wednesday. I suppose key points: Nizhny have dropped out of the top two. They have yet to win since the restart, and have dropped down. They lost to FNL yesterday on the Wednesday. FNL are on a good run of form since the restart, especially since they changed the manager just before the restart, just before the winter break. So yeah, they're going well. So yeah, Nizhny not doing so good currently. You've got Torpedo, who have now not won in 5 matches, stretching back to before winter, and have only scored 1 goal in that time. And Sergei Nishevich under a bit of pressure from the fans. They've now dropped out of the top 4 with Alania hopping over them, having won 2 of their 3 games since the restart. The top 6, as we were discussing before, which was Karelia, Nizhny, Orenburg, who've now jumped up in 2nd, Torpedo, followed by Alani and Velez in 5th and 6th. Neftekhimik and Baltica have now jumped up. Velez have had a poor restart, have yet to win a game, whereas Neftekhimik and Baltica have both won at least 2 games and have jumped up to join the race. So they're now, alongside Velez, 5 points off 4th place, and have extended the race for the playoffs potentially to 7-horse, maybe even an 8-horse race. So the top's getting a bit tighter. Karelia pulling away. They have won with ease in each game so far. Beat Tom Tomsk 3-1 away. Sergeyev with another brace during the week. They're now the top scorers in the league and are really starting to pull away a little bit. And it's looking for sure like they're at very least going to be automatically promoted, if not title contenders. Towards the bottom, say FNL are on a bit of form. Akron have grabbed 4 points out of the last 6 and are trying to claw their way out of the relegation zone. You've got Irtish just hanging on in that final spot, and Krasnodar too potentially looking to drop into the relegation zone. So that'll be interesting. You know, Akron have got a bit left to do, but there's room for them to potentially do it. And then we've got poor old Shinnik, who we've mentioned a few times now, but since the restart, they've conceded 16 goals in 3 games, compiled by a 6-0 loss to Yenisei on Wednesday, which mid-table Yenisei, I should add, who have had a pretty average season. So they're almost officially gone at this stage. I think. Let's think how many points. They're 17 points down from the relegation spots with 9 games left to play. So give it another 3 or 4 weeks, and they'll be gone officially already. And they are not good right now. So a shame, but some easy points there for the rest of the league whenever they got to face them for the rest of the season. And I'll just want to point out Tom Tomsk got a win against Alania, lost this week against Krylia, but put up a good fight. They've got a young group of players brought in under Alexander Kurzhikov, who obviously has worked with the Russian youth system in the past. A couple of players have really stood out, younger players. One guy, Nikita Krivtsov, 18-year-old midfielder, has started every game so far. And I was watching the game against Krylia yesterday, and looks a very, very, very bright player. Yet to get any cap at Russian youth level. Comes out of, I think it's Torpedo Vladimir or Torpedo Armavir, one of those two clubs. So a real gem sort of maybe picked out of the rough there, and looks like a promising one, definitely. So that'd be interesting to see where he goes next season, because Tom Thompson are almost certainly condemned to relegation as well at this stage. So those are the headlines. I think I've not forgotten anything, but we'll see.
Richard, what do you think about Shinnik? Are they pretty much gone now?
Yeah, I think we can officially confirm them gone. Give it 3-4 more match days, and that'll be that. Quite nice that actually for Nizhny's point of view, even though they've had a poor restart, it's quite handy that they've got Shinnik this weekend. So that really has got to be the motivation to get the promotion charge back on track, and surely they'll do it against Shinnik. And I know they've not had a good restart so far, Nizhny, but that's an ideal opportunity and one that they've got to grab, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that, that's this week's podcast over, pretty much. Now, it has been actually quite a quiet week in Russian football for once, or at least by the usual standard. But even having said that, we have still received our customary ridiculous decision of the week. And that award goes to Lokomotiv. It is in response to what is quite a scandalous photo. I mean, it was uploaded online, and you can see that all over VK and Twitter. Well, you can find it yourselves, but Logo have sacked their entire media team, which comprises of over 20 staff. They were all actually removed from their posts without the club even lining up any replacements, and it was very much a snap decision, which is where the stupidity part of it comes from. As the story is still developing, I'll refrain from commenting too much on it at this time, but I do hope that in this difficult environment in the world right now, those who were sacked are able to find themselves in a new job quite soon. In particular, a friend of the site, Tim Bayramov, Hanu interviewed him as part of our RPL social media manager series. You can find that on the website. It's a real interesting read about the mechanics of what goes on in the media side and the social side of the football club. Another bit of news is that Tambov goalkeeper Sergei Rizhikov has now left Tambov and has actually retired from football at the tender age of 40. Certain Alexander Gregorian, the rooster himself, has been sacked from his job at Urartu in Armenia. So if Sergei Galitsky does decide that he wants to sack a certain Murad Masayev, there's a perfect ready-made replacement right there. A highly experienced manager with great man management skills and interest in the youth. This weekend, there's another Moscow derby in the cards. The Spartak host Dinamo. And in another big battle for the European spots, Sochi travels to Lokomotiv. Now, the site is unfortunately still experiencing some technical gremlins. We are working our best to try and sort these out behind the scenes, but it seems okay from the outside looking in, but I'll just let you know the back end of the site is lots of critical errors right now. We'll get that as live as soon as we can, but we'll continue as usual with all the podcasts and YouTube channel. I just want to say thanks, Dave, for coming on this week.
No problem. Pleasure as always.
Thank you, Richard.
No problem at all. Absolute pleasure.
This is the RFN podcast. Goodbye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет с ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.